I remember that Christmas Eve like it was yesterday, even though years have passed since then. The suburban streets were covered in a thin layer of snow that reflected the dim glow of streetlights, making everything feel eerily quiet. I was sitting in my living room, sipping on coffee and finishing the last of my gift wrapping. The clock ticked closer to 11:07, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The first knock came exactly at 7 o'clock, slow and deliberate, echoing through the quiet house. It wasn't urgent or frantic, just persistent enough to make me tense. I froze in my seat, staring at the front door, trying to convince myself it was nothing. When I looked through the peephole, the porch was empty, the snow undisturbed except for a few scattered footprints. I tried to laugh it off and returned to my wrapping, but my hands trembled slightly as I held the tape. Every creak of the house sounded unnaturally loud in the stillness, and I found myself checking the clock more than the presence. The silence felt heavy, almost pressing against my chest, and I couldn't ignore the feeling that someone was just outside. As the minutes dragged toward midnight, I kept glancing at the door, imagining shadows where there were none. The knock came again, exactly 1 hour later, identical in timing and rhythm, like clockwork. I held my breath, slowly walking toward the door, my heart hammering in my chest. When I peeked outside, the snow was marked with fresh footprints leading around the side of the house. I hesitated before opening the door, staring at the tracks that seemed too deliberate to be accidental. The footprints disappeared into the shadows near the edge of the property, leaving only a cold breeze behind. I stepped outside, my boots crunching in the snow, scanning the yard carefully. There was no one there, only the faint echo of my own footsteps. Feeling unsettled, I went back inside, locking the door behind me and peering out through the blinds. My mind raced with questions, and I tried to reason it away. Maybe a prank, maybe someone delivering a package. But the timing, the footprints, and the emptiness made it hard to convince myself. I could feel eyes on the house, even though I couldn't see anyone. Hours passed slowly, the house feeling heavier with each tick of the clock. Every sound, even the hum of the heater, seemed amplified in the quiet, making me jump at shadows. I kept checking the front door and the side windows, half expecting to see movement that never came. Yet each time I looked, the footprints seemed fresher than before, as if someone had circled the house again. By 3 in the morning, exhaustion mixed with fear, but I couldn't bring myself to sleep. The knocks continued, now almost expected, each one precisely at 7 o'clock, like a cruel timer set just for me. I started documenting the hours, jotting them down on scraps of paper while peeking through the blinds repeatedly. The isolation of the suburban night made it feel like the entire block was empty, but the knocks proved someone, or something, was there. The final knock of that night lingered longer than usual, vibrating through the wooden door and into my chest. I opened the door quickly, fully expecting to confront someone, but the yard was empty once again. Only the footprints remained, leading around the side, unbroken and fresh in the snow. I couldn't explain who had done it or why, and the feeling of being watched lingered long after the footprints disappeared. I stepped back inside, shutting the door slowly and trying to convince myself I was imagining things. The house felt smaller suddenly, every corner darker, every shadow heavier than before. I kept glancing at the side window where the footprints had disappeared, half expecting to see a figure lurking there. The snow outside glistened under the streetlight, but it offered no comfort, only a cold reminder of what had happened. I moved to the couch, pulling a blanket around my shoulders, though it did little to calm the unease building in my chest. Each creak of the floor, each whisper of wind against the siding, made me tense instantly. I kept thinking about the exact timing of the knocks, the precision that made it almost mechanical. My mind raced through every possible explanation, yet none seemed plausible, and fear began to settle in. Trying to distract myself, I stared at the Christmas tree, its lights twinkling softly in the otherwise quiet room. But the beauty of it couldn't erase the feeling that something had been circling my house all night. I noticed the faint outline of more footprints near the back corner of the yard, though I was sure I had locked the door earlier. The sight made my stomach tighten, reminding me that this wasn't over. I decided to call my neighbor, hoping someone else had noticed the strange activity. Her line rang several times before she finally picked up, her voice groggy and tense. She hadn't seen anything unusual, she said, and asked if I was okay. Hanging up, I felt more isolated than ever, the thought that the stranger knew I was alone pressing on me. The knocks came again at 4:07, though I had long stopped checking the clock. I froze as the sound echoed, perfectly timed, and a shiver ran down my spine. This time, it felt closer, almost deliberate in the way it struck the door. I could hear my own breathing, uneven and shaky, as I watched the shadows outside the glass panes. I grabbed a flashlight and moved cautiously toward the side of the house, my heart hammering with each step. The footprints led around the edge of the property as before, crisp and fresh, but there was no sign of the figure. The snow glimmered under the beam of light, yet nothing seemed natural about the way the prints appeared. I realized then that someone had been walking around me all night, unseen, precise, and methodical. I returned inside and locked every door, pulling the curtains tightly shut. Even with the precautions, I couldn't shake the sensation of eyes on me from the dark corners outside. Every sound became amplified, from the hum of the fridge to the occasional groan of the house settling. My nerves were frayed, and I found myself pacing, unable to sit or sleep. The digital clock glowed again, approaching 5:07, and I felt a pull toward the front door despite knowing I shouldn't look. The knock arrived as expected, echoing through the house, louder and heavier this time. I peeked through the blinds, my hands shaking, but saw nothing except the untouched snow and the faint tracks leading around the side. By sunrise, exhaustion weighed on me more than fear, though neither left completely. I watched as the early light revealed the full yard, the prints still faint in the snow but gone from the immediate porch area. I realized then that this had been happening all night without interruption, and I had no way to explain who had done it. The unease lingered like a shadow over my home, subtle but persistent. The day passed slowly, the memory of the knocks and footprints gnawing at the back of my mind. I kept checking the windows, the side yard, and the driveway, but the snow showed no new signs of intrusion. Even in daylight, the house felt different, as if the previous night had left a weight pressing against the walls. I tried to convince myself it was over, but the unease refused to fade. I spent most of the afternoon wrapping the remaining gifts, my hands shaking slightly despite my efforts to stay calm. Every sound from outside made me pause and strain to listen, fearing the pattern might return. The neighbors' children played across the street, oblivious to the tension gripping my home. I envied their innocence and the normalcy they represented, something I felt slipping further away. By evening, shadows lengthened across the suburban lawns, and I felt the familiar pull toward the clock. The precise rhythm of the knocks haunted me, ingrained into my mind, impossible to ignore. I stayed near the front door, watching the street for any sign of movement. Time seemed to stretch, and each minute ticked with a quiet but suffocating intensity. At 7 o'clock, I made the mistake of glancing at the clock too closely. 11:07 approached again, and with it, the heavy, deliberate knock returned. My heart jumped, and I felt an icy grip in my chest, realizing the pattern had not ended. I grabbed my coat and stepped cautiously toward the door, every nerve screaming to stop. Peering outside, the footprints were fresh once more, curving around the side of the house and disappearing into the shadows. The snow had preserved each step perfectly, as though the person wanted me to see it. I considered calling the police, but something about the precise timing felt almost taunting, like revealing themselves would be worse than ignoring it. I spent hours watching the side yard through the blinds, unable to tear my eyes away from the darkened corner where the prints ended. Nothing appeared, yet I felt a presence, subtle and unnerving. The quiet suburb, normally comforting, now felt like a stage set for someone else's plan. Each passing moment intensified the sense of being watched and followed without any tangible proof. By midnight, exhaustion and fear collided, leaving me in a state of tense fatigue. The final knock came, echoing through the still house, lingering longer than ever before. I opened the door, fully expecting confrontation, but the yard remained empty. Only the footprints traced a deliberate path around the house, their freshness undeniable in the soft snow. I closed the door and leaned against it, shaking and unsure if I would ever understand what had happened. The sensation of being observed stayed with me, subtle yet persistent, like a weight I could never remove. Even as daylight broke and the snow began to melt, I felt the echoes of that night linger in every quiet corner. It's been years since that Christmas Eve, yet I can still see the footprints and hear the echo of the knocks. The house never felt entirely safe again, and I never stayed home alone on Christmas Eve after that. Some nights, I still wonder who or what had circled my home with such precision. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. I remember that Christmas Eve more vividly than any other holiday night, even though it happened years ago. The suburban streets were quiet, with snow lightly covering lawns and cars, reflecting the soft glow of the streetlights. I was helping my little sister hang ornaments on the tree while our parents finished setting up dinner in the kitchen. Everything felt normal at first, the calm only broken by the occasional crunch of snow outside. She suddenly froze mid-step and whispered, "The tall man is back." I turned toward the backyard through the sliding glass door, expecting some shadow or neighbor, but the figure was impossible to miss. A tall, thin shape stood perfectly still, staring directly at our house from behind the fence. The way it held itself was unnerving, rigid but silent, like it had been waiting for us all evening. I called out to my sister to step away from the door, trying to keep my voice steady despite my racing heart. She clutched the tree skirt and didn't move, pointing insistently toward the figure. I squinted through the frosted glass, but no features were visible, just the long silhouette looming against the dim snow. My stomach tightened, and a chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the cold. I backed away from the door, telling my sister to come closer to me, but she refused to look away. I grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter, more for comfort than protection, and tried to convince myself it was a prank. Our parents were in the other room, oblivious, laughing and talking, completely unaware of the presence in our yard. Every minute that the figure stayed motionless felt stretched, as if time itself had slowed around it. I crept closer to the door again, my hand pressed against the glass, eyes locked on the silhouette. The figure didn't move, didn't even blink, just stared, its gaze heavy and almost tangible. I noticed footprints in the fresh snow leading from the side gate to where it stood, perfectly spaced, too precise to be accidental. I swallowed hard, my mind racing through every possible explanation, none of which made sense. Even as I debated calling my parents, a sense of helplessness settled over me. I couldn't see a face, only the shape of someone impossibly tall, and my little sister's insistence made it all the more real. The air inside the house felt heavier, as if carrying the tension from outside. Every sound, from the ticking clock to the faint hum of the refrigerator, seemed amplified against the stillness of the night. I decided to move away from the sliding door and signal my sister to follow me toward the living room. Her small hand in mine was ice cold, trembling as she whispered that it hadn't moved. I kept glancing through the blinds, but the figure remained, unflinching, almost watching me watch it. My pulse pounded, each beat echoing in my ears louder than any sound outside. We huddled together near the couch, debating whether to alert our parents or simply wait it out. Every instinct screamed to do something, but fear rooted us to the spot. The figure made no sound, left no mark beyond the footprints in the snow, yet its presence was undeniable. Minutes stretched into hours, and the backyard seemed frozen in time, frozen with it. As the clock edged closer to midnight, the tension became unbearable. I tried reasoning with myself that it would eventually leave, that this was a prank or a passerby lost in the snow. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that it was purposeful, that someone or something had chosen this night to watch us. My sister buried her face in my shoulder, whispering again that it wasn't leaving. Night stretched on, and the house felt smaller, every shadow deeper than before. My little sister stayed close, clutching my sleeve, her eyes wide as she kept glancing toward the sliding door. I tried to calm her, whispering that maybe it had gone, but the silhouette remained, motionless against the faint glow of the snow. Even the distant hum of the streetlights couldn't mask the feeling that someone, or something, was intentionally watching us. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, its beam cutting through the dark corners of the room. I inched toward the door, shining the light across the yard, but the tall figure didn't flinch. The footprints in the snow were still crisp, leading from the side gate and stopping abruptly beneath the dim tree line. My mind raced, imagining every possible explanation, none of which felt plausible, yet none felt comforting either. The wind outside shifted, rattling the fence and stirring the bare branches of the trees. The figure remained, unblinking and silent, as if it were aware of every thought racing through my head. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, realizing that this wasn't random. It had been waiting, watching, timing its appearance precisely. My sister clung to me tighter, whispering that she knew it would stay all night if we didn't do something. I debated calling my parents, but the thought of explaining what we were seeing felt impossible. Their laughter and voices from the kitchen contrasted sharply with the tension pressing in from the backyard. Every few minutes, I glanced toward the window, convinced the figure had moved closer, yet it always remained in the same spot. The snow sparkled unnaturally in the pale light, making each footprint look deliberate, impossible to ignore. Minutes passed like hours, and I realized sleep was out of the question. The figure didn't make a sound, but the intensity of its presence weighed down on me, making the walls feel as though they were closing in. I checked the locks again and pulled the curtains tighter, hoping that would be enough. But even with the barriers, the unease lingered, a constant reminder that we were not alone. I finally sat down with my sister on the couch, holding her close as we watched the yard in silence. Her small hand felt icy in mine, and I could hear her shallow breathing as she whispered, "It's still there." I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself, realizing that our house, usually a safe haven, felt like a trap. The suburban neighborhood, quiet and familiar by day, now felt alien and threatening in the shadow of the tall figure. I thought about trying to distract ourselves with movies or music, but even those comforts felt hollow. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind seemed magnified, feeding the paranoia that had settled over us. I considered calling a friend, someone who might come over and help, but my phone felt useless in the grip of fear. The figure stayed, its outline still visible in the snow, patient and unyielding. Hours dragged into early morning, the night refusing to release us from its grip. I kept imagining what it would do if I stepped outside, whether it would vanish or confront us. The footprints remained, perfectly preserved despite the wind and drifting snow. My sister leaned against me, whispering that she didn't want to look, yet couldn't stop herself from peeking at the tall figure. By the first light of dawn, the figure hadn't moved, and the snow had softened around the footprints, but the presence lingered. I realized that the terror wasn't just in what we saw, it was in the knowledge that someone had been watching us with intent. Our quiet suburban street, usually peaceful, now felt like a stage for something incomprehensible. The memory of that night would haunt me for years, long after the figure disappeared. As the first rays of Christmas morning filtered through the blinds, I forced myself to believe the figure was gone. My sister stayed glued to my side, eyes darting toward the yard every few seconds. The snow had started to glisten softly under the sunlight, and yet the backyard felt heavier, like the tension from the night hadn't lifted. I tried to focus on the presence under the tree, but my mind kept replaying the silhouette in the dark. I stepped toward the door cautiously, pulling back the curtains just enough to glance outside. The figure was nowhere in sight, but the footprints remained, partially melted yet still discernible in the snow. I felt a shiver run through me, realizing the tracks proved someone had been there, watching all night. My little sister whispered again that it had to be the same man, and I couldn't deny the fear in her voice. Trying to distract ourselves, we began breakfast, though neither of us could eat much. The smell of cooking, normally comforting, felt oddly out of place against the lingering tension. Every few minutes, I found myself peeking out the window, expecting to see the tall figure reappear. But the yard remained still, the only movement coming from the wind teasing the branches above. By mid-morning, I considered calling the police, though I hesitated, unsure what to say. How could I explain a tall, silent figure standing in the yard with no evidence beyond footprints and fleeting terror? My parents were bustling about, preparing for Christmas dinner, completely unaware of the night's events. The normalcy around us clashed sharply with the memory of the figure, making the house feel surreal. I decided to step outside briefly, boots crunching in the snow as I approached where the footprints ended. The tracks led only a short distance before fading into the lawn, but they left an imprint in my mind that refused to vanish. The air felt colder than usual, and I sensed a presence still lingering just beyond what I could see. I hurried back inside, locking the door behind me, knowing that visibility didn't mean safety. The rest of the day passed slowly, with our family exchanging gifts and laughter, yet I couldn't fully engage. Every glance toward the backyard pulled my attention, and my sister clung closer, refusing to leave my side. Even familiar rooms felt unfamiliar, haunted by the night's events. The tall figure's presence had altered the house, leaving a subtle but persistent weight over every corner. That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, I stayed awake, peering out through the blinds. The yard was empty, snow untouched, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were still on us. The memory of the figure's silhouette, rigid and watching, refused to leave my mind. I realized the fear wasn't just in what we had seen. It was in knowing someone could appear at any moment, unannounced, and vanish without a trace. Sleep finally came in short bursts, uneasy and light, with my sister curled beside me. I kept the blinds closed tightly, checking the yard each time a shadow passed in the moonlight. The figure didn't return, but the memory remained, more real than any decoration or festive cheer. Christmas Eve had left its mark on our home, and a quiet, enduring fear that would last far longer than the holiday. Even now, years later, I can picture the tall man standing there, watching, and I still feel that same chill creeping over me. The footprints, the silence, and the unblinking gaze of something unknown are etched into my memory. It's a reminder that even in the familiar comfort of home, someone could be watching from the shadows. I'll never forget that Christmas Eve. even though at the time it felt like any other snowy evening in our suburban neighborhood. My best friend and I were walking home from a late holiday party, laughing and joking despite the icy wind cutting through our coats. Streetlights reflected off the snow-covered sidewalks, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch farther than they should. Everything felt normal at first, until I noticed a figure standing a few houses behind us. At first, I thought it was coincidence, just someone heading in the same direction, but my friend froze mid-step and whispered, "Do you see him?" I turned subtly, pretending to look at the houses, and my stomach sank. The man was staring at us, standing perfectly still, as if frozen in place the moment we looked. Every instinct screamed that something was off, and the playful holiday atmosphere vanished instantly. We quickened our pace, laughing nervously to mask the tension, but the figure mirrored every step we took. Whenever we turned a corner or crossed the street, he would stop, pretending not to move, only to start following again when our backs were turned. My friend's hand brushed mine, and I could feel her trembling slightly, mirroring my own unease. The quiet suburban street suddenly felt too exposed, too empty, and far too watchful. We tried taking different routes, weaving through alleys and side streets, but he always seemed to find us. Every time we glanced over our shoulders, he froze, blending into the dim light like a shadow painting itself onto the snow. My best friend whispered that maybe we should call someone, but neither of us had the courage to pull out our phones. The laughter from earlier had vanished completely, replaced by a tense, almost suffocating silence. At one point, we ducked behind a parked car to hide, hearts pounding as our breaths formed clouds in the cold air. I counted slowly, hoping he wouldn't hear, then peered around the corner to see him standing frozen, just watching. My friend grabbed my arm, insisting we move again, and we ran as fast as the icy sidewalks would allow. Every step felt heavier, like the snow itself was dragging at our feet, making escape more difficult. Each time we thought we had lost him, a shadow appeared in the distance, perfectly still, waiting for the moment we let our guard down. The houses we passed were dark, lights off, giving no clue if anyone inside could even see what was happening. It was as if the whole neighborhood had gone to sleep, leaving just the two of us and the man who refused to be ignored. Our fear grew, not just from him, but from the helplessness that surrounded us. We decided to split up, thinking we might confuse him, but immediately regretted it. My friend's voice called to me, tight with panic, and I ran toward her, hoping to regroup. The man didn't follow immediately, as if he were calculating, waiting for the perfect moment. Our breaths came fast, our footsteps echoing loudly in the empty streets. Yet he remained eerily silent, a predator disguised in plain sight. Finally, we reached my friend's house, slipping inside and bolting the door behind us. We leaned against it, panting and shaking, trying to convince ourselves that it was over. Outside, the snow reflected the faint glow of the streetlights, but there was no movement, no frozen silhouette. Yet both of us knew the fear wasn't gone, only paused, waiting for another moment to return. The rest of the night passed slowly, our windows tightly shut and curtains drawn, each shadow cast by a tree or mailbox causing our hearts to race. We whispered to each other about what we saw, each recounting the man's stillness and the way he seemed to anticipate our every move. Sleep eventually came, uneasy and shallow, with the knowledge that someone had been following us that night, precise and patient. As the first light of Christmas morning approached, we stayed huddled near the window, unwilling to leave the safety of my friend's living room. The streets were quiet now, snow glistening under the weak morning light, yet every shadow seemed sharper than it should have been. I kept scanning for the man, though I knew he was likely gone for now. My friend whispered that she could still feel him out there, and I had to agree. The tension didn't leave with the night. We decided to wait a while before venturing outside, nervously sipping hot chocolate to calm our nerves. The normal holiday sounds of distant carolers and rustling packages felt surreal, almost like they belonged to another world. Every few seconds, I glanced at the window, expecting the frozen figure to reappear. The snow was pristine, except for our own footprints from last night, but the memory of him made every step outside feel dangerous. I suggested we retrace our path from the previous night, hoping to understand how he had followed us. My friend hesitated, worried that it might lure him back, but curiosity outweighed fear. We stepped lightly, careful not to disturb too much snow, scanning every corner and alley as we moved. The neighborhood looked entirely normal, but my mind played tricks, imagining him frozen behind every tree and lamppost. As we walked, I noticed small details that had escaped me before, the way certain streetlights flickered, the occasional shadow of a tree swaying despite no wind. It made the neighborhood feel alive in an unsettling way, as if it were aware of our presence. My friend shivered and kept close, whispering theories about the man and why he might be following us. The sense of being watched didn't leave, making every step feel measured and cautious. We turned a corner and saw a movement out of the corner of our eyes, but when we looked directly, there was nothing. Our hearts raced, and I grabbed my friend's hand instinctively, realizing that the fear wasn't in what we saw, but in what we expected to see. Each intersection we passed felt like a potential trap, the stillness around us amplifying every sound. The quiet suburb, once comforting, now seemed hostile, amplifying every imagined movement. I suggested we go to the nearest store to grab some coffee, hoping that being around people would calm us. The few early shoppers gave us glances that felt too sharp, though likely harmless, feeding the paranoia. Every time we looked back, there was nothing. Yet the memory of the man frozen in place made us jump at shadows. It was as if the neighborhood itself conspired to heighten our fear, every ordinary sight now threatening. As the morning progressed, we tried to focus on festive distractions, but each time we glanced out the window, a sense of unease returned. My friend suggested we check the back alley where he had first appeared, just to make sure it was empty. Hesitant but determined, we walked carefully, our footsteps light in the fresh snow. The alley was empty, but every sound of wind rattling against fences made us jump, imagining him lurking just out of sight. We decided to take a longer route back to her house, hoping distance and daylight would provide safety. The man didn't appear, and slowly our tension eased, though the memory of his precise frozen presence remained vivid. Every house we passed now seemed ordinary, but the echo of that night lingered, a reminder that the neighborhood could harbor someone watching silently. By the time we returned, we felt slightly safer, though the fear had not entirely vanished. Even after being indoors, the image of him lingered, rigid and unblinking, frozen in the snow, and I realized the night had left an invisible mark. We kept talking, trying to rationalize, yet the subconscious fear persisted, each shadow casting doubt. Christmas Eve had turned from festive to a quiet battle with paranoia, and the memory of that man following us remained hauntingly real. The neighborhood would never feel completely safe again. As the sun climbed higher, we tried to immerse ourselves in holiday cheer, but the memory of the man following us clung stubbornly. Every tree, mailbox, and fence post seemed to hold a potential hiding spot, our minds filling in the gaps. My best friend suggested we stick close to people for the rest of the day, hoping crowds would keep him away. Even with neighbors out decorating and shoveling snow, the feeling of being watched lingered like a shadow over us. We decided to walk to a nearby cafe, keeping the main street in view as we moved. The sidewalks were busy now, families carrying gifts and laughing, but each passerby made us glance over our shoulders. I kept imagining him frozen somewhere among them, blending in until we weren't looking. My friend held my hand tightly, both of us tense, alert to every movement in our peripheral vision. As we sipped our hot drinks, we discussed what had happened, trying to make sense of it. We speculated about whether he had been someone harmless, a lost man, or someone watching for reasons we couldn't guess. The story didn't feel finished, and the anxiety gnawed at both of us. The idea that he could have been waiting for hours, frozen until we looked back, made the entire experience surreal. Returning home, we decided to avoid the usual shortcuts, taking wider streets that were more crowded. Each step felt calculated, our pace deliberate, trying not to look suspicious while staying aware. Even with daylight, every shadow between houses made us flinch. My best friend whispered that she would never walk alone again on Christmas Eve, and I couldn't disagree. We reached her house, and the relief was immediate but cautious. We kept curtains drawn and double-checked locks, unable to shake the memory of his silent presence. The holiday decorations seemed almost absurd now, bright and cheerful against the fear that had gripped us. It was as if the joy of Christmas was overshadowed by the invisible tension of being watched. We spent the rest of the day indoors, attempting to distract ourselves with movies and food. Yet every sound outside, the rustle of branches, distant car doors, or children laughing, made our hearts jump. The man hadn't returned, but the possibility that he could at any moment left a lingering unease. Even the familiar neighborhood felt altered, tainted by what had happened. That evening, my best friend and I reviewed the route we had taken, tracing where he had appeared and disappeared. We tried to understand his pattern, whether random or intentional, but nothing made sense. The precision and patience he displayed had left a mark on our perception of safety. Every ordinary detail of the neighborhood now felt like it could hide something sinister. When night fell again, we stayed near the window, lights dimmed but curtains pulled tight. The snow sparkled under the streetlights, but there was no movement, no frozen figure waiting for us. Still, the fear was not gone. It had become internalized, a quiet pulse of anxiety we couldn't shake. We knew we had survived, but the memory remained sharper than any holiday cheer. Years later, I can still picture him, standing perfectly still, blending into the shadows, observing without a word. That night changed how we saw our neighborhood, our safety, and even our trust in what we thought we knew. The man had left without confrontation, but his silent vigilance left a lasting scar on our sense of security.